I was sitting at the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. Just a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and a number I didn't recognize on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Mr. Callahan? The voice was careful, measured. This is Dennis Ware. I think you know why I'm calling. I didn't. Not yet. But something in the way he said it made me set the cup down slowly. I'm 51 years old. For the last 14 years, I've been married to a woman I built everything with. A house in Raleigh. 2 kids, my son Marcus, who just turned 17, and my daughter Lily, 14. A landscaping business I grew from a single truck and a push mower into a company with 11 employees and contracts across 3 counties. I'm not a rich man by most definitions, but I built something real. Something I was proud of. My wife. I'll call her by what she is now, not her name. My wife was the one who handled the books. She had a background in accounting before we had kids, and when the business started growing, it made sense. I trusted her completely. That's not a small thing to say. I mean, I handed her the keys to everything and never looked back. That was my first mistake. Dennis Ware turned out to be a private investigator. He had a quiet office above a dry cleaner on the east side of town, and he called me on a Thursday afternoon in March to tell me he needed to meet. In person. That day if possible. I asked him what it was about. He paused just long enough to make my chest tighten. Your wife hired me 8 weeks ago, he said. I think you need to hear what I found before I go any further with this. I met him at 4 o'clock. His office smelled like old carpet and coffee. He was maybe 60, heavy set, with the kind of eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and didn't waste time. Mr. Callahan, your wife came to me in January, he said. She told me she suspected you of having an affair. She wanted documentation. Phone records, locations, photographs, the full package. I sat back. An affair. I hadn't been anywhere near another woman. I coached Marcus's weekend soccer league. I came home for dinner most nights, and the most exciting thing I'd done in the past year was drive to Charlotte for a supplier meeting. I almost laughed. What did you find? I asked. He folded his hands on the desk. Nothing. Absolutely nothing on you. He let that sit for a second. But I found some other things. Things I wasn't looking for, and things I'm not comfortable staying quiet about. He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it slowly, the way you open something when part of you already knows what's inside is going to change everything. The first page was a bank statement. Not one of our joint accounts, one I'd never seen. An account in my wife's name only, opened 3 years ago. I stared at the balance. $47,000. I turned the page. Transfer records. 11 months of small withdrawals from our business operating account, ranging from $800 to $2,200 each. Each one coded in our accounting software as a vendor payment. Vendors I'd never heard of. Vendors that, when Dennis had run them down, turned out to be shell names. Non-existent. I turned another page. A storage unit rental agreement. A unit on the south side of town, rented in my wife's maiden name. Paid in cash, renewed every 6 months for the past 2 years. I had no authority to search the unit, Dennis said. But I ran surveillance at the facility. She visited it 4 times over the course of my investigation. I photographed what she carried in. He reached across and turned to a set of photographs near the back of the folder. The first thing I recognized was the lamp. A tall brass floor lamp with a green glass shade that had belonged to my grandfather. It had sat in our living room since the day we moved in. I hadn't thought about it in years. It was just always there. Until it wasn't, I realized. Until sometime in the past year, it had quietly disappeared, and I hadn't noticed, because I trusted the woman who lived in my house. There was an end table in another photo. My mother's. Dark walnut. Carved legs, the kind of piece that can't be replicated, because nobody makes things that way anymore. She passed 7 years ago, and I'd taken 3 pieces of furniture when we cleaned out her house. I was looking at one of them in a photograph taken outside a storage unit my wife had been renting in secret. I didn't say anything for a long time. How much? I finally asked. Dennis told me he'd estimated, conservatively, that the business account had been shorted by somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 over the 3-year period. He couldn't be certain without a full forensic audit. $80,000. From the business I'd spent 14 years building. Running through fake vendor payments while she kept the books and I drove the truck and trusted her with everything. I asked him why he was telling me this instead of just completing the job my wife had paid him to do. He looked at me steadily. Because she paid me to investigate you for a crime you didn't commit. And in the process, I uncovered evidence of crime she's actively committing. I'm not in the business of helping cover that up. He paused. I'm refunding the remainder of her retainer. I won't be filing a final report. I drove home on autopilot. I parked in the driveway and sat there for maybe 20 minutes looking at the front door of the house I'd bought. The house I'd repainted twice. The house where my kids grew up and where my grandfather's lamp had stood in the living room until it quietly vanished. I didn't go inside. I called my attorney instead. Her name is Patricia Holt, and she's been handling my business contracts for 6 years. When I told her what I had, she went very quiet for a moment and then told me not to touch anything, not to confront anyone, and to come in first thing the next morning with the folder Dennis had given me. I slept in the guest room that night. My wife didn't ask why. That told me something. The next 3 weeks were the most careful of my life. Patricia connected me with a forensic accountant, a woman named Sandra who had the kind of calm, clinical focus that made me feel like the chaos in my chest was slightly more manageable. Sandra went through our business accounts, our joint personal accounts, 3 years of records, and confirmed what Dennis had suspected. The actual total was $91,000, pulled in pieces small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. Patient, methodical. The work of someone who understood accounting, who knew exactly where to move things so they'd disappear quietly. I thought about all the times I'd thanked her for handling the finances. All the times I told people at parties that I didn't know what I'd do without her keeping everything organized. I felt sick. Sandra also found something else. A pattern of transactions in our joint personal account. A regular transfer, first of the month, $500, going to an account she couldn't trace from the records alone. 14 months in a row. I asked Dennis to look into it. He came back to me in 4 days. The account belonged to a man named Greg Sousa, 38 years old, lived 20 minutes from our house, worked in commercial real estate. Dennis found evidence of at least 11 months of regular contact, phone calls, a messaging app, 2 separate occasions at a hotel in Durham. I sat with that information for a full day before I could do anything with it, not because I was surprised exactly. I think some part of me had been braced for it the moment Dennis first called. But knowing and seeing the documentation are different things, and I needed a few hours to let it settle. What I felt wasn't what I expected. There was grief in there somewhere, and anger. But what sat heaviest was something closer to exhaustion. 14 years. All those dinners and soccer games and arguments about paint colors and holidays with her family and mine. All of it running parallel to something I was completely blind to. Not because I was careless. Because I trusted her. I've thought about that a lot since. The trust wasn't a weakness, it was real. What she did with it, that's on her. Patricia advised me to let her take the lead from that point forward. I agreed. She drafted the divorce filing on a Tuesday. She also drafted a separate civil complaint for conversion of business assets and breach of fiduciary duty, to be filed simultaneously. She consulted with a criminal attorney as well, who confirmed that the fraudulent vendor payments constituted wire fraud, given that some of the transfers crossed state lines through our payment processor. We scheduled everything for a Friday. I will tell you that the 4 days between Tuesday and Friday were the strangest of my life. I came home. I ate dinner at the table. I helped Lily with a history project on Wednesday evening while her mother sat across the room watching television. I didn't perform happiness. I just moved through the days quietly and waited. On Friday morning, before I left for Patricia's office, I sat with Marcus at the kitchen counter while he ate cereal before school. He's 17, old enough to sense tension without knowing its shape. He'd been quieter than usual for a few weeks. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. "I will be," I said. And I meant it, even though everything was about to become very hard. The papers were served that afternoon. My wife was at home when the process server arrived. I was at Patricia's office when she called my cell phone, twice in a row, and I let it ring. Patricia handled everything with a precision I was grateful for. The civil complaint was filed in tandem with the divorce. Sandra's forensic report was entered as evidence. Dennis's documentation went in alongside it. The criminal referral went to the DA's office the following Monday. What came out over the next several weeks was more than I'd known. The storage unit held not just my grandfather's lamp and my mother's end table, but an antique mirror that had hung in our hallway, and a set of hand-painted ceramic pieces my mother had collected over 30 years, all pieces that had disappeared gradually, across years, replaced sometimes with something similar enough that I hadn't noticed the originals were gone. She had an eye for what I looked at closely and what I took for granted, and she'd been careful. She'd sold 9 pieces through an estate resale broker in Greensboro over a 2-year period. The total recovered value was somewhere around $34,000. Most of that money had moved through the account I didn't know about and into transactions. Patricia's team was still untangling. Greg Sousa had received some of it. How much and in what form was still being worked out. My attorney filed a motion to compel disclosure of all financial accounts as part of the divorce proceedings. My wife's attorney, her third in 6 weeks after the first 2 withdrew, objected to everything and delayed what they could. It added months to the process. But Patricia is patient, and so am I. What I want to tell you about, more than the legal back and forth, is what happened with the kids. My wife's attorney tried to argue for primary custody based on what she called my emotional unavailability during the marriage, a claim that was going to be difficult to support against 14 years of school pickups and soccer coaching and weekend breakfasts. Marcus, by that point 17 and a half, had his own opinion and the legal standing to express it. He told the Guardian ad litem that he wanted to live with me. Lily was harder. She was 14 and she loved her mother. And watching her try to hold that alongside everything she was slowly learning was one of the most painful things I've ever witnessed. I didn't ask her to choose. I didn't say a word against her mother to her, not once. I just made sure she knew where I was and that I wasn't going anywhere. She's living primarily with me now. That took time. My wife entered a guilty plea to 1 count of theft by conversion, a felony in our state, in exchange for the criminal fraud charges being reduced. She received 3 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent mark on her record. The divorce finalized 6 months after filing. She received no share of the business, the civil judgment handled that, and no alimony, given the documented financial misconduct. She received her personal belongings, her car, and a percentage of the equity in the house that was substantially reduced by the restitution attached to her name. I kept the house. I kept the business. I kept the business. I kept my kids, as much as any parent keeps their kids after something like this. The lamp is back in the living room. The estate broker in Greensboro was cooperative once the civil complaint was filed, and most of the pieces that hadn't already been resold were returned. 1 ceramic bowl is gone for good, sold to a private buyer who couldn't be traced. I've made my peace with that. Sandra, the forensic accountant, is now on a quarterly retainer for the business. I have a bookkeeper who reports directly to me and an accountant who does independent reviews. I built those systems because I needed to, and because I should have had them before, and because the version of trust I had before, the kind where you hand someone the keys and never look again, isn't something I'm capable of anymore. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it as a fact about who I am now. Dennis Ware sent me a card about a month after the divorce finalized. It just said he was glad it worked out. I sent him back a bottle of bourbon and a note that said the same. He had no obligation to call me. He did it anyway. There are still people like that. I think about the morning she hired him, what she was looking for, what story she told herself about me, about us, about what she needed to justify what she was already doing. I'll never know the full version of that. I've stopped trying to reconstruct it. What I know is this. She set something in motion to protect herself, and it came back and told the truth instead. Marcus graduated from high school in June. I coached his last soccer game in April. A rainy Saturday, mud everywhere. His team lost by 1 goal, and nobody cared. We went out for burgers after, and he talked the whole drive home, and I listened to every word. Lily made honor roll in the fall. She calls me on the phone sometimes just to talk, which is not something teenagers do unless they feel safe. I don't take that lightly. The business cleared its best revenue year on record. 11 employees, 3 counties, a second truck I bought outright in November. I'm not angry. I was for a while, and I think that was necessary. But anger is expensive to carry, and I have better things to put that weight into. I still drink my coffee black in the morning at the kitchen table. The lamp is in the corner by the window. Some mornings the light comes through the green glass shade the same way it did in my grandfather's house, and I sit with that for a minute before the day starts. I still have myself. That was always enough to build from.